A very warm welcome, everyone, to this important briefing that we've got on the new BISSC Safer Recruitment Code of Conduct. I'm Nalini Cook, and I'm the Business Manager at BSME. And I'm joined today by Debora Forsyth, who is the CEO at BSME, and Fiona Cottam, Principal of Hartland International School in Dubai and BSME's Safeguarding Champion. Both Debora and Fiona represent BSME on the BISSC working group that developed the code of conduct that we're going to be talking about today. So let me kick off the main part of this webinar today by Debora asking you first, could you explain what BISSC is and why the code of conduct was developed, please?
Sure, Nalini. BISSC, first of all, stands for the British International Schools Safeguarding Coalition. It's a collaborative partnership between 6 major international school associations, and those 6 are AOBSO, BSME, COBISS, FOBASEA, LAHC and NABS, and between us, we represent almost 1,000 schools worldwide and are responsible for the safeguarding of over 500,000 children and young people, which is quite a responsibility. And this is one reason why the code was developed. We recognised as a group of associations that while each of our individual associations had their own safeguarding standards, there wasn't a unified approach to safer recruitment across the international school sector. And with staff moving between schools and regions across the world, we felt we needed consistent and rigorous standards that would protect children regardless of the country that they were in or the association that their schools belonged to. So that was where the idea behind the Code of Conduct came from. The code itself establishes a standardised framework to ensure that all of our member schools across the world operate to the highest standards of safer recruitment, with the aim, of course, of ultimately preventing unsuitable individuals from working with children.
Thanks, Debora. Now, this has been quite a collaborative effort, and Fiona, you've been really heavily involved in developing this code of conduct in partnership with the various associations that Debora mentioned. Why has this cross-association approach been so important?
I think, Debora touched on it there when she talked about the movement and migration of teachers, not just within our region from a BSME perspective, but certainly around the world. And people make choices about where they live and where they work. So from a school leader's perspective, it's absolutely crucial that we have something that says the same thing for everything that we do. I regularly recruit staff who've worked in schools in other associations, particularly coming from the Far East, making that move closer to home, perhaps sometimes. And I need to have the confidence that the previous principal and the previous school that employed them actually applied the same rigorous standards that BSME sets out for its schools in this part of the world. So what this code means is that we're on a level playing field as a group of schools and organisation. It means that high levels of safeguarding standards, they're not optional extras that schools can buy into and choose to do if they want to. What this says is that if you're a BISSC school, every single member school will now operate with the exact same set of standards. And that's phenomenal that we've come to this agreement. It's taken an awful lot of work to get here, not for political reasons, but just because of the nuances of different regions and the requirements. So it'll protect children, it'll protect our staff, it'll protect our schools, and it'll protect the integrity of our organisation. But it also provides real clarity for school leaders. So instead of us all interpreting different association guidelines, we now have one comprehensive standard that covers everything from the advertising of positions right through to maintaining staff records and writing references. So it's a milestone piece of not legislation, but of agreed policy of working together collaboratively. It's extraordinary, really.
Been a great piece of work. Thanks, Fiona. So we know who developed the code and why. Debora, can you highlight some of the main expectations that schools will need to meet under this code, please?
Sure. I'd say that the code really has 2 fundamental pillars. The first of these are that schools must have robust safer recruitment policies that are aligned with national and international standards, and that the all recruitment staff across the school, this is not just the principal, just the HR lady, but all staff involved in recruitment across the school should be properly trained in safer recruitment. And then the second pillar relates really to clearly communicating the school safeguarding commitment through all of their recruitment materials. Fiona spoke there about it really starting right up at the job advert. So as soon as you have a position that you want to fill, that you're being very clear in that job advert with your commitment to safeguarding, and that's stated very clearly up front. And that then repeats through every single stage of your recruitment. So on your application form, on your website, in your interview process, that safeguarding is reinforced at every single step. But of course, it is obviously a lot more than a policy, because a policy on paper achieves nothing. So it is very much about the implementation of that policy and then evidencing of that implementation. So the policy then talks about the need for comprehensive background checks for all countries where candidates have lived for 6 months in the past decade, thorough referencing from leaders within schools, not from colleagues, and that those references are then followed up with phone calls, and then detailed interviewing processes that include safeguarding questions too.
Now, you mentioned evidence there. Fiona, the code clearly states that there is specific evidence of compliance needed. So what kind of documentation should schools be preparing for this?
I mean, let me start by saying that I would imagine that, the majority of actually all the schools in all of our organisations already do this. But what this does is it gives us clarity to simply say that schools have got to maintain comprehensive and detailed documentation that actually demonstrates not just, as Deborah said, their policy, but their policy in practice. And that's really the key thing. So that will include their safer recruitment policy. And we would recommend that it's on a school's website, for example, so that it's visible and transparent for everybody. Examples of job advertisements and making sure that you clearly state, that safer recruitment checks will take place. Application forms which have a safeguarding statement in them as well. Reference request forms that actually ask specifically about safeguarding concerns. And it's really important to maintain detailed interview notes that show that safeguarding questions were asked. Some of us can interview hundreds of applicants over an interview season, as it were, which has now become more of an annual thing than one time in the year. And it's really important that I think we keep those notes. I tend to keep ours for about 6 months. There's no guideline or specific rule on that, but it certainly helps from a cross-association perspective that we can have those conversations. But critically, schools have got to maintain an up-to-date single central record and register. Again, there's no one format that works, but as long as it's compliant, certainly through BISSC and through the International Task Force, there are exemplar material. And I know that, Deborah, we were already talking this morning about how BSME intends to develop other exemplar material so that we can share it with colleagues to inform best practice. But that single central register has to cover all staff, not just teachers, volunteers, governors, your peripatetic teachers that come in, your sports facilitators that come in and work in the school, and also have the staff files to support that verify that all the checks have taken place. One of the other things that we recommend that schools do is an annual staff self-declaration form and evidence of regular policy reviews and staff training as well. So the key message is, we guess, if you can't document it and you can't prove that you did it, well, there needs to be a paper trail somewhere. So schools really do need to keep detailed, secure records of every step of their recruitment process, and that will keep us all safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, I think most schools are doing this incredibly well already. It's just making sure you've got that paper trail. Now, there was something in the code, the mention of the ITFCP guidelines. Can you explain what those are and what the guidelines add, please?
Look, the International Task Force came about because of a particular case that had happened in the Phobosea part of the world just over 10 years ago. And the International Task Force on Child Protection came together as like-minded people who wanted to try and close some of the loopholes that existed. And I think actually the work of BISSC supplements that and takes that onto the next step for British schools across the world. So we're an important group in terms of reinforcing some of the great work that's taken place in the world already. But the task force does provide really good guidance of best practice. It has a huge amount of materials and case studies and resources on its site, particularly valuable for schools using external recruitment agencies. And you'll find the link to the task force and all of their documentation on the BSME website as members. So the International Task Force emphasises consistent interview practices with designated chairpersons, comprehensive reference checks, verified then with follow-up phone calls or video calls, detailed record keeping and centralised systems. It's got a really good checklist that exists that many of us tend to use in our schools. And these guidelines, they complement the code's requirement, what BISSC has now done. And it provides practical implementation guidance that people from around the world, not just in British schools, but in CIS schools, American schools, and different curriculums, have added to and improved over the years. So our mantra about safeguarding is that we all share best practice, and that's what this is about.
Absolutely. Thank you. Deborah, if anybody's feeling a little overwhelmed by all the things that we've said you need to do, how can schools get support to meet these requirements of the Code of Conduct?
Sure, Nalini. The priority really across all of our associations, and it has been repeated multiple times in our ongoing discussions, the aim is really to support schools in meeting the new standards. We recognise that different schools in different parts of the world will be at different starting points when they sign the Code of Conduct. And the key factor really is that we're asking all schools to commit to meeting the standards in full as soon as possible, whatever their starting point. So we do recognise that for some schools this will be maybe a very short process and they'll be able to go through and tick and say we're already fully compliant. For other schools that might be going through the document and saying, okay, we need to change our practices and we need to change our policies in a number of different areas. The key thing really is committing to making those changes to reach the standards. So in terms of actually getting support, if you find yourself as a school in the situation where you're not quite there yet, schools can definitely reach out to their association safeguarding leads. That's Fiona and myself in the case of BSME, for guidance, for information on training opportunities and resource sharing. As Fiona said, the idea of exemplar materials that we can share with schools who are looking to set up something for the first time is something we very much want to be able to do. BSME offers regular safeguarding webinars. We have policy templates, and we can also facilitate direct consultation support. Now, whether that's with myself or Fiona, or possibly pairing a school with another school in their vicinity that is possibly in a better position that can share and support with them. This is one area where competition really doesn't enter the frame, and collaboration is absolutely essential for all of us. And as an addition, this year, to tie in with the release of the BISSC Code of Conduct, BSME is also funding free safer recruitment training for all member schools during the course of the year to help at least one member of staff in each school have that training and take that information and support back to their schools. So really, it's definitely not about catching schools out or trying to show a school as not doing the right thing. It really is about elevating standards across the whole global education sector. And if any school at all feels that they're struggling with any aspect of the implementation, we would definitely say reach out for support earlier rather than later, and don't ignore it and hope it'll go away.
Absolutely. It's definitely a supportive thing, trying to ensure that everybody is where they need to be. But Fiona, what happens if schools don't comply with the Code of Conduct?
Oh gosh, thankfully that's not my job to make that decision. It's going to be Deborah and the exec committee. But look, we're a member organisation, and BSME is a member organisation for its members. So we have to make sure that we're committed to something that as an organisation we've now signed up to. So if somebody simply fails to, not because they're struggling, like Deborah said, not because they haven't got the answers, not because they haven't got the right level of support, but if they simply fail to be compliant and they don't put best practice in place and they fail to adhere to what we as an organisation believe is the minimum expectation in terms of recruitment and safeguarding, then sanctions, will exist, and they're based on the severity of the issues that the exec might face in terms of some of the complaints that might come through. But the focus, like Deborah said, is always on support and resolution in the first instance. It might be that a written formal warning is issued to the member school. Schools may be placed on probation, for example, with enhanced monitoring and enhanced support. But in some serious cases, if there's a complete breach in terms of our code of conduct and our expectation as an organisation where we as members are the deciders of our own fate, then schools temporarily might be suspended from membership while corrective measures are actually implemented. You know, the worst case scenario, termination of membership, it really is reserved for extreme cases where schools repeatedly fail to meet standards or actually refuse blatantly to engage with the support that BSME will definitely offer and will give to all of its members. So just to emphasize again, you know, what Deborah said, our goal is to help every school be successful and succeed in meeting the standards. We're not a penalty driven organisation, and really that's a worst case scenario. So I can't imagine we'll ever get there, and fingers crossed we'll sort of stay on the right side and we'll all work together to make sure that everything is positive.
Absolutely, thank you. Now, Deborah, one of the things that might need to take place is people raising a concern about a school's recruitment practices. How can that be done?
Yeah, thanks, Nalini. There will be standardised online reporting forms that can be accessed through any of the association websites. So any school, any educational organisation or any individual can report a safer recruitment concern using the appropriate form, which will get submitted to initially the association of membership. The form will allow for anonymous reporting so that people can feel the ability to report without fear of retribution. Once a report has been received by a member organisation, the association's safeguarding lead will be notified, and then there will be an inquiry process. And as Fiona said, that will involve myself as safeguarding lead for the organisation, plus members of the executive committee and possibly Fiona herself. And that inquiry will basically look into the validity of the concern, whether there's any clear explanation for that, and how we can support the school if there has in fact been a breach there, to improve their processes to avoid that happening in the future. That process there of investigating an inquiry will aim to be thorough and fair, and it will always be focused on protecting children while supporting schools to improve their practices.
Thank you. Okay, so to round it all up, we've had a lot of information shared. Fiona, what practical steps should school leaders be taking immediately?
Look, I think that I can't remember, Nalini, whether it was you or Deborah earlier on said, you know, the first thing to do is not to panic. I know that this sounds like it might be a lot of new information, but actually for, you know, 95% of schools, this is going to be standard procedure and what they do already. For those who feel that maybe they're not quite up to speed and haven't got things as sharp as they might do, I think school leaders, first of all, need to have a look at the BISSC Code of Conduct. That will be shared with everybody. It will be available on the BSME site, and I'm sure that it'll come out in an email to update members as well. You know, review the BISSC Code of Conduct against their current practices and identify any gaps. If they have gaps that they feel they can't fill, reach out to any of us. Everybody will help and support, but ensure that all staff who are engaged in recruitment actually have appropriate and up-to-date safer recruitment training. It's available on a multitude of platforms. It doesn't have to be something that's very difficult to do, but it's really important that everybody who's involved in the interview process has that. That's a non-negotiable, really. Anybody who's involved in recruitment and in interviewing needs to have done that training. Review the job adverts that you post around the world on the TESS or wherever it might be, or on the BSME site or wherever you currently recruit. Review your application forms, your interview processes, and just ensure that they're compliant in terms of the code's requirements, because these will be non-negotiables for BSME member schools.
Thank you. And Deborah, what's the timeline for implementation?
Yeah, Nalini, we will be sending out the BISSC Code of Conduct to BSME member schools in the coming week. It will be accompanied with an explanatory document and this video as further explanation for school heads. So that will go out now, and schools will be asked to sign up to that pretty immediately. And as I said earlier, while we're expecting schools to sign up now and to begin that implementation and that checking of their procedures immediately, we understand that some aspects may take time to fully embed. And we're very happy to work with schools over a reasonable time period to get to that point, depending on what their starting point is. The key really is demonstrating good faith efforts to meet the standards and engaging with association support where that might be needed. We will be monitoring compliance and offering ongoing support throughout the implementation period.
Thank you. Well, thanks to both of you for taking the time today to run us through that. I think the message is really clear. The BISSC Safer Recruitment Code of Conduct represents our collective commitment as an association and as a larger group of associations to those highest safeguarding standards across international education. I mean, schools that engage with the process and seek support when needed, maintain those rigorous recruitment practices, I think we'll find that this code strengthens their safeguarding culture in school. For everyone listening, resources including the full Code of Conduct document and reporting forms are available on the BSME website. And if you have any questions or need any support, please don't hesitate to reach out to the BSME team. Thank you.